Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. As you can see, I am behind on posting. I'm hoping to keep a Saturday schedule going, but this week you will probably be seeing this video on Monday, even though I am recording it on Sunday afternoon. The reason I am currently in the studio in the Dungeon of Doom, also known as our basement, is that JT is upstairs watching the football playoffs. The regular season is done, and they're getting ready to head toward the Super Bowl. So he's watching some playoff games today. I wanted to stay out of his way and get some work done. So that's why I'm down here doing this recording. And I do hope to get back on my Saturday posting schedule next week. One of the reasons I'm behind this week is that I took Saturday off to visit with family. It is important to take a break from our busy day-to-day writing lives every once in a while and just allow ourselves some fun time. And that's what I did on Saturday. So again, that's why I'm recording on Sunday, probably posting on Monday. We were also very busy this past week with the Two More Books LLC setup that we're getting pretty far along in the process now. The initial paperwork is done and filed and all that good stuff, but there are some tangential chores that we need to get done to make sure everything is all ready to go. And it's taking a bit of time away from our writing, but we're hoping that once this is all settled, we will be able to get back to producing more work to put out. Of course, JT has quite a few books available, and he will be releasing more in the next couple of months. He currently has Finding Salvation available for pre-sale at 99 cents. That will be releasing on January 31st. And also he will be releasing Zoe in February, I believe. So he has two new books coming out in the next 2 months. The book that I'm currently working on will probably be ready to go in the middle of 2025, not in February. That's probably when it's going to editing, but at least I hope. But it will probably be available by summer, I'm hoping. And part of the busyness of this past week was the fact that JT and I spent a night in Virginia City, Nevada. And we did that to do research for the book that I'm working on, which I'm currently calling the VC Ghost book. And you've heard me mention it before. But what I want to talk about today is a little bit about the details that I learned from our overnight trip that I hope to incorporate into the book. And I'm going to show you some of those details through a series of photos. I didn't take any video up there, unfortunately, though we did do a video podcast while we were up there. The audio got corrupted somehow, and since we were in an older hotel, I don't know if it was a Wi-Fi issue or if it was a ghost issue. I'll leave that to you. But the video version is posted, and I'll put the link to that in the description below. But in the meantime, I can show you some photos of the Silver Queen Hotel where we stayed and talk a little bit about that experience and the sensory information that I got from the hotel. Now, we chose to stay in an older hotel instead of a more modern one because part of the book takes place in 1875 Virginia City. Now, a lot of Virginia City burned in 1875. So the Silver Queen Hotel is actually a structure that was built in 1876 after the fire. It's not quite contemporary with the time period I'm writing, but it is close enough. And some of the architecture would be very reminiscent of what was common to the buildings in Virginia City at that time. There are still a lot of existing buildings that were built after that Great Fire of 1875, and some of those are bed and breakfasts, some of them are museums, some of them are restaurants. So a lot of them can be visited, and I do recommend, if you're interested in that kind of thing, that you go and spend a night up there, especially if you are a fan of old Western towns. Now, since this book contains two time periods and two storylines that intertwine, I want to make sure to get the flavor of both, but they need to be separate flavors. I'm obviously very up to date with everything going on in the modern world, and I do keep track of most of the pop culture references and things like that. So I feel fairly comfortable writing about those things. The things I'm not quite as comfortable writing about, and the ones that I'm not steeped in on a day-to-day basis, are the more historic elements of 1875. So, as I said, the Silver Queen was built in 1876. Now, the first thing, when we checked into the hotel, we parked in front on C Street, which is the main north-south street through town. And that is the street that most people are probably familiar with if you've spent at least a short time in Virginia City. The C Street entrance to the Silver Queen leads into the saloon, and there is a bar in there as well. And we went to the bar to check into the hotel, which was an interesting experience. And that may have been something that people would have done back in the 1870s. They provided us a receipt that they wrote out by hand, which is also something we didn't sign into a guest ledger, which I think would have been more common during the 1870s, but they provided us what they would have taken off of a little pad of paper that they just wrote the room number and the rate and things like that on it. Then they provided us a hard key for our room, which is very uncommon these days. Most hotels that we visit on a regular basis are much more modern, and you will access your room with a card key, which you either swipe through a slot in the door, or more commonly these days, you will hold it up against a sensor on the door handle itself, where the light will turn green and it lets you into the room. Now, we did not have a historic key. We had a key that was more common to the 20th century, and it was on the little plastic, I guess you might call it a fob. It's a long piece of plastic that has the hotel's name and address, and it gives you the room number, and then the key is attached. And I'll show you a photo of that here. So of course, once we get the key, we're going to go to our room and get settled in. Now, in order to do this, we had to leave the saloon and we went back out onto the street, which is a boardwalk. And from this photo, you can see that right next to the hotel is a place called Grandma's Fudge, which they make some amazing fudge and candies there. You can watch them do their work through the window, and smells wonderful. On the opposite side of the hotel, we're kind of bookended by fudge on one side and then bakery, rotisserie on the other side. So there was a lot of food right nearby. And it's an interesting spot to be located in. But as you can see from this photo, you got a very clear image of the Grandma's Fudge sign. You can see there is a concrete sidewalk that goes into boardwalk. The boardwalk is in front of the Silver Queen Hotel, and you leave the main door of the saloon, go out the boardwalk into the next door, and then up these stairs. Now, if you're like me, you look at these stairs for the first time and think, oh my gosh, that's spooky. It's very dark at the top. The angle of ascent is very steep. They have a pretty small tread. The railings on either side are not easily visible, and they're all worn down from many, many years of hands trailing up and down the stairs. You can also see that the carpet is well worn. I don't know if it's quite as obvious, but there was a bit of a tilt to the stairs and probably to the building itself, because the buildings and all the surface properties are on top of a series of mines that are honeycombing the hillside below. So the various Comstock mines are still under there, and so every once in a while the ground shifts and settles and caves in, and it can be a little bit unnerving to walk around Virginia City and realize that you don't know exactly where these honeycombs are beneath you. Now, once we got to the top of the stairs, you can see this hallway where our room was located. Now, looking down, it looks like an optical illusion that these two doors are so close together, but it's actually how it was oriented, that those doors were very close. That little triangle at the end of the hallway was very tight, with the two rooms adjoining each other, having doorways that almost face each other. You know, they're just not quite face to face, but they're very close. It was a very odd sensation. And you can also see above the doorways, there are little transom windows. And there is a reason for that I will talk about more with a later photo. Now, if you turn around and look the other direction in our hallway, again, we are on the second floor, but as you can see, when we're looking toward the west, toward the back of the hotel, there's another short flight of steps taking you up to the second level of the second floor, basically. And at the end of the hallway, you can see a light and a figure, and that's actually JT looking out onto B Street, which is the street behind the hotel on the west side. And it is possible to park out there and walk directly to the second floor, but we parked down on C Street and took the stairs. So as you can see, the orientation of the hotel is very interesting. And since it is perched into a hillside, as I said, two entrances on two different levels, but there's also a third floor, which is not accessible from a street. Now, you can see from this photo that there was a skylight on the third floor, and that and the transom windows were in place to allow light into the building at a time when they might have not had things like electric lighting. I don't know how early electric lighting would have arrived in Virginia City, but it's possible that at the time the hotel was first opened, the rooms were actually lit by gas lighting or maybe candlelight. They probably would not have wanted to have those on during the daytime. So in order to get light into the rooms that may not have had windows facing the street, they had a series of transoms and skylights that allowed light in during the day. As you can see, looking up at the skylight, you can see the third floor. There is a balustrade, an oval one, around the hole in the floor to protect people from falling through. Also, I think it might have been more modern. It looked a bit like fencing, but the iron railing to keep people from falling down over the balustrade was also there. So this allowed light from the roof to go down to the third floor and the second floor as well. So you would be getting that lighting at various levels of the hotel during the daytime. Let's see what else we have here. Oh, along the stairway to the third floor, there was a very interesting little cabinet with a padlock. Now, as you can see, this cabinet, the door is made of part of a metal sign. The sign is upside down and it is cut. It looks like maybe it's a quarter or a half of a sign. And that sign is actually from the Silver Terrace Cemetery, which I found a little creepy. I'm not quite sure why they cut part of the sign from the cemetery, because it distinctly talks about you can't do rubbings of the gravestones, and it has a quote about death and visiting cemeteries and visiting those who have passed on. So I found that a bit creepy, but you know, just one of those quirky little things you find in older buildings. You can also see, now that we've gotten into our hotel room, if you're looking at the room to the south, which is what this photo is, we were in room 12. So it was on the southeast corner overlooking C Street. And going in the door, you can see there's the bed. There is a clawfoot tub in the room directly across from the bed. There is a very large window. So this room, since it's on the level before you take that extra little set of steps up to the back part of that second floor, The ceilings in that room were about 16 feet tall. It was a very high room, and that would be because the third floor is all one level, but the second floor is actually two separate levels. So I assume the rooms toward the back or west side of the hotel had more, probably 8-foot ceilings, whereas our room had more like a 12 to a 16-foot ceiling. You can also see that the windows are very large. I believe they may have been about 8 feet tall. They have these beautiful vintage looking drapes. I can't tell you how old they would be, but they are very Gone with the Wind looking. And we did mention in our podcast, if you're a fan of the Carol Burnett show and you saw the skit of Went with the Wind where she had the dress, she just saw it hanging there in the window and had to have it complete with curtain rods. So that's what we thought when we looked at those curtains. And the drapes themselves, we did close for the evening so that we would not have light coming into the room. And it also helped keep the room a little bit warmer because it was cold in there. You can see there is a baseboard heater, but due to the size of the room and these large windows that were very drafty, they were not fitting into the frames very well because, as I mentioned before, the hotel has probably shifted over time. The windows themselves allowed a lot of cool night air into the room, and having the drapes closed helped us keep warm. You can also see the brass bed, which had a mattress that almost felt like it was from the 19th century. It didn't feel like springs. It felt more like it was some kind of almost like a corn husk. I'm not sure if they had some kind of a pad on top of the mattress, but it did evoke feelings of what I would assume would be an older mattress. And even though they replaced the floor with a laminate, a more modern laminate, which is probably on top of an older wood, they did have a nice rug down there, but the floors themselves were not vintage. The walls, yes. The floors, no. Now, in the room looking in the other direction, you can see that there are a couple of transoms. There's actually a door from our room into the adjoining room, which was locked with a transom above it, and then a window above that. So those probably would not have had curtains or would have had curtains open so that they would allow light into the next room over, which did not have windows to the outside. That room also had a transom to the hallway. So that in the 1870s would have been how that interior room got light or got sunlight during the day. We also, you can again see the bed. You can see there is a piece of antique furniture by the door, which has some hooks. There was not a closet or an armoire in this room. So we had a series of hooks hanging over the bathroom door, or the door to the water closet, I should say, because the bathroom was in 3 parts. We had the water closet with the toilet. We had the clawfoot tub that you could see across from the bed. And then there was a sink with a little medicine cabinet that was right outside the water closet. So at the time, the hotel may have had something like a clawfoot tub in the room, may or may not have had running water. I would assume in Virginia City at that time, since there was a lot of money coming out of the Comstock, that they did have plumbing. So I don't know if they actually had toilets yet, but they would have had probably a tub and potentially a sink situation, or maybe one of the wash stands with the bowl and the pitcher. So, you know, again, thinking about what would have been common to that time period, I'll need to do a little extra research to find out for sure what they would have had in the 1870s, whether or not it was plumbed and whether or not they would have been using gas or candle lighting versus electric light. The hotel also did not have an elevator, of course, because as you could see, there were a lot of stairs. Let's see here. Now back down to the street, out in front of the hotel, there was a window with a display. And here you see someone who may look familiar to you. This is Mr. Mark Twain, whose birth name was Samuel Langhorne Clemens. He took the name Mark Twain while working for the Territorial Enterprise in Virginia City. And in these photos, you can see he's sitting there holding a very battered copy of the Territorial Enterprise. Now, the sign in the hotel window stated that the Territorial Enterprise would have been on that site prior to 1876. I am not 100% sure that is true. I found other information that said the Territorial Enterprise was located across the street from the Silver Queen Hotel in a place that's now called the Silver Dollar Hotel, which directly opposite. So there is a little bit of a discrepancy. I'm not 100% sure which is correct, but I'm leaning toward believing the Silver Dollar Saloon or Hotel, was the site of the Territorial Enterprise. The later Territorial Enterprise is actually a couple of blocks to the south, and it is now the Mark Twain Museum of Memories. Now, according to the information I found about the Silver Dollar Hotel having been the site of the Enterprise, they said that during the 1875 fire, so Mark Twain would have worked at street level, which would have been the second level because that one angles down to D Street. He would have had an office up on that upper level, which was along C Street, but the printing press and everything were down on the lower level, which would have been more on a ground level because that would be heavy equipment. And during the 1875 fire, they're saying that the upper stories of that building burned, but the basement, or I guess you would call it a daylight basement, it survived the fire, and that the equipment from that basement is now located in the Territorial Enterprise later building that is the Mark Twain Museum of Memories. So I'm not sure if that made sense. It's kind of convoluted how I was trying to describe it, but Virginia City is built on the side of Mount Davidson in the Virginia Range. The city is terraced, and the north-south streets descend steps in elevation toward 6 Mile Canyon. And if you're looking to the east, you can see that's where the 100-mile view is. Now, the C Street, as I said, is the main north-south street that people who are driving through Virginia City will take that street. That's where most of the tourists tend to wander. There are some parking areas down on D Street. There is also a railroad depot down there because the V&T Railway did come up the hill. It came up from Carson City, and they have rebuilt a stretch of the V&T from Carson City up to Virginia City. That is a fun trip, which I highly recommend. You would need to go to the Eastgate Depot in East Carson City to catch the train up to Virginia City, but you can take it in the morning and then get off and wander around for a few hours and then take it back down in the afternoon. So that is a fun way to experience Virginia City and to experience the V&T Railroad. But as I mentioned, that depot is down on the D Street level, and there is a more modern hotel down on that street. And also we went down, I don't recall, it might have been D Street or E Street. We took a street or two downhill and headed north to visit the Silver Terrace Cemetery, which also plays a part in my story because obviously paranormal romance, ghosts, and cemeteries all go hand in hand. So those are a lot of the details that I will be incorporating into this book, especially and specifically the 1876 hotel ambiance, the feeling of being in that room at night. It was quite a different sensation. There was a lot of noise on the street, even though it was the middle of a week. Once the sun sets, much of the town is closed. There's not much open after sunset. I think if people want to do anything in the evening, they would go to either Reno or Carson City. So the bars are open, obviously, for a while. People will be going to the restaurants and bars and enjoying themselves. And then, of course, once they're leaving their dinner and or other entertainment, one of the let's see, we had dinner at the Delta Saloon, and that was a very large saloon that had TVs mounted so that people could watch sports while they're eating, but it was mostly a bar. So it had the TVs, it had pool table, and it had a lot of bar tops. And I suspect a lot of people were hanging out there. The Silver Queen Saloon actually closed about the time we checked in. So it closed earlier. And I'm sure they're open later during the summer months, but at this time of year, not a lot of people go to Virginia City in the winter because it's cold, it's dark, and it could be snowy. But the sound of people leaving the saloons after having, been enjoying themselves, imbibing a little bit maybe, they tended to be a little noisy and rowdy, which I think would have been common to Virginia City in the 1870s, because at that time there were more than 30,000 people in Virginia City, as opposed to the around 900 residents of modern day. And it was a very cosmopolitan place. There would be various shifts of miners. I'm not sure if the mines worked around the clock, but there would probably have been at least 2 shifts, 2 8-hour shifts, if not more. So you'd have miners coming and going. You'd have the sound of the mining equipment, the head frames. You'd have the horses and carriages going through town. You would have the obviously the smells of the animals, because you would have the manure from the horses and the the rutted, muddy roads from, especially in the January, February time frame, where things would have been pretty damp. There would probably be snow or ice on the ground. So you'd have the smells, you'd have the cold, you'd have the noise of the people and the vehicles, all of that. I could kind of sense that in the hotel room that night. And with having such high ceilings, we had only 2 lights in the room. There was one over the sink and one extended from the ceiling. There was a ceiling fan up there. So it was rather harsh light. And it reminded me of moving into a new house. You know, that feeling when you're not comfortable, you're not yet familiar with your new house, and you don't yet have any lamps. So you're using those harsh overhead lights, and there's still a lot of echo because you haven't put down your rugs and things. That was a lot of the feeling. It was like that uncomfortable, I'm not familiar with this place. It feels different and off. And that feeling was, it was a good sensation to experience again, because I've lived in my current house for so long that I'm very comfortable no matter how dark it is. So having that feeling of being off balance, of being in an unfamiliar place, that kind of thing is going to factor into this book, because there will be some shifts of, obviously time shifts, because you have 2 different time periods happening, and spirit activity. I did not personally feel anything while we stayed at the hotel, but as I said, we did try to record an audio that got corrupted, and we recorded it the way we normally do. So why it got corrupted, whether it was a Wi-Fi issue or whether it was something else, that's a matter for whoever wants to decide, because I don't know one way or another. I don't really have any strong feelings about whether or not there is paranormal activity. I kind of go back and forth. I have definitely experienced things that were a little off, but I don't know if they were things that, if it was something mental on my part or if it was something physical outside of me. So all that being said, that was our experience this past week, including our trip to Virginia City. As you can tell, I'm still a little bit off balance. I'm also figuring out this YouTube thing, and hopefully the videos will improve as we move along. But I hope this video was enjoyable and that it made sense. and that it provides you a little information about how a writer works and how you might research putting some sensory details into your material. If you are a fellow author and you're following along, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel and, continue with us on this adventure as we get our LLC up and running and as we write more and publish more books. We are independent authors. We do plan to remain independent authors, whether or not we try traditional publishing again at any point, because I did attempt that in the past. I don't know if I want to attempt that again in the future, but, and I should say I did not successfully traditionally publish in the past, but I did query and I went through a whole thing, and that's for another video. At this point, I am rambling, as JT likes to say. So thank you for following along. I hope this video made sense. If not, please feel free to leave questions and I'll be happy to answer them if anything I said was not clear to you. And as I said, in the future, I hope that these will be a little bit more professional. I'll get my feet under me and be able to provide more information about how my writing journey is going, what kinds of challenges I'm facing with my writing, maybe answer questions about any writing related questions that you might have, and anything else you might want to talk about. If you have questions for either myself or JT, please feel free to leave them in the comments. As I mentioned, I will link to the video that we did from Virginia City. But until next week, I hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you next Saturday.